Welcome. We are so glad that you are joining us today. I'm Joe Swimmer, the Executive Director of the SEEK Network, and on behalf of Church Pension Group and SEEK Network, we are pleased to bring you this discussion about paid family leave and the Church's response to paid family leave, and then also what's happening legislatively around this issue. We are excited to have a terrific panel to be in conversation this afternoon, and it will be moderated by Reverend Julie Whitworth out of Indianapolis. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia. Thank you so much. And we are grateful to you all for joining us.
Thanks, Joe. And thank you for convening us, bringing us together for this important conversation. If you have joined us today, you are probably already aware that currently the US is the only industrial country without a federal paid family leave policy. Only 9 states and the District of Columbia have policies in place, and many workers must balance pregnancy or caregiving for young children or other family members with work responsibilities. To address these inequities, paid family leave is part of legislative packages being introduced by our new administration, and also really important conversation in our church. The health and wellness benefits of paid family leave are basically incontrovertible, and I think you're going to hear about some of them today. But it all still feels pretty elusive for our nation and even for our church. The 79th General Convention called for a task force to research and create, in consultation with Church Pension Group, a proposal for church-wide paid family leave policy for consideration at this next General Convention. And I'm so happy that today we have some key people who have been in conversation and working really hard on those conversations, both for the church and on behalf of the church in Washington. So I'm delighted to introduce to you our 3 distinguished panelists who are in each way experts on the possibilities for and obstacles to paid family leave. First, we have Devin Anderson. Devin is rector of Trinity Episcopal Church in Excelsior, Minnesota. She's been ordained for over 22 years and has served in 4 other congregations, both in Michigan and Minnesota. She's an elected member of the Standing Committee of the Episcopal Church in Minnesota. And in the wider church, she's a 5-time deputy from Minnesota to General Convention, where she served on and chaired the Standing Committee on Liturgy and Music. And currently she serves on the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church, the Joint Standing Committee for Planning and Arrangements, the president of the House of Deputies Council of Advice, and pertinent to today's conversation, she chairs the task force to develop church-wide family leave policies, an initiative sprung from Me Too activism at the 2018 General Convention. Also joining us today is John Servais, the Senior Vice President of Benefits and Policy Design at Church Pension Group. He is responsible for plan design and policy development, financial performance and management, and overall business strategy for all benefit plans, products, and policies. Prior to joining CPG in 2016, he spent more than 22 years in the benefits consulting industry, working with American Benefits Consulting, Aon Hewitt, and Foster Higgins. He advised such Fortune 100 companies as JP Morgan Chase, Verizon, Alcoa, and Morgan Stanley in their benefit programs. And finally, I'm joined by Rebecca Lindler Blatchley, who is the director of the Office of Government Relations of the Episcopal Church, where she oversees the office's work on domestic and international policy issues, with a particular emphasis on reconciliation, the environment, refugees, and immigration. Prior to joining the Episcopal Church in 2016, Ms. Blatchley was the Senior Policy Advisor for Africa in the Office of Religion and Global Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. From 2007 to 2018, she was acting chief of the Strategic Communication Division at U.S. Africa Command in Stuttgart, Germany, and has served as special assistant to the Principal Deputy Undersecretary of the Defense for Policy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense and as a research associate in the Post-Conflict Reconstruction Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That must have been quite a business card, Rebecca. I'm thinking about your big title there. She's the recipient of the Office of the Secretary of the Defense Medal for Exceptional Public Service. My role today, once I'm done with these introductions, is simply that of moderator. I do have a personal connection to some of the issues of paid family leave. I myself have 3 children, each of whom was born at a different moment in my employment life, in my ordained life, each in a different moment with different benefits available to me before and after ordination. And because of differing benefit leaves or fear of negative repercussions around my child's birth, my maternity leaves ranged from 3 months unpaid to 1 week to 3 months partially paid. These are hard personal decisions that families need to make. More recently, as rector at Trinity in Indianapolis, I have chosen and worked with my lay leaders to provide paid family leave benefits for my clergy associates, including male colleagues, but not without some substantial conversation along the way. But despite my lived experience, I'm no expert, but these folks are. And so I am thrilled to be learning alongside you at home about paid family leave policy issues for our church from these distinguished panelists. So thank you so much for joining us today. And before we go on, I also want to thank Anne Maloney at at Church Pension Group, who had the vision with Joe to bring us together. And so we're so happy for her support and her advocacy. So, panelists, I've learned so much already in the last week, and I'd love to start with you, Devin. And I'd love to hear about the conversations at the last General Convention, which led to the creation of this task force, what your goals are, what your work has been in the last 3 years.
Well, thank you, Julia. That's such a nice introduction, and thank you for the welcome. And I really appreciate the invitation to be here and participate on this webinar. I am not an expert. Very gracious of you to say that, but I'm not an expert. I think my own experience with family leave started before I went to seminary. I was a legislative assistant for a United States senator. And in the last year that I was there, the 103rd Congress passed the family leave bill. So my boss was senator from Michigan, senior senator from Michigan, was an original co-sponsor of that bill, and that fell into my legislative area. So from a legislative point, had quite a bit of involvement in kind of the early formulations of family leave. Ironically, my boss at the time was chair of the small business committee, and so he worked on the small business exemption, which got tagged on to this, which said that employers that had less than 50 employees were exempt. So basically, in one swoop of a pen, we basically excused a large portion of our workforce from that benefit. But that did actually equip the bill to get through. So everything is incremental, and you work incrementally. And that part of my story around family leave actually transcends to the last 3 years chairing this task force. That kind of a golden rule of policy and change making is that it's always incremental, and you never get everything you want in one step. So part of my story with this task force was an incremental. How could we advance the path toward full family leave policies for the Episcopal Church incrementally? I will also say that after I was ordained, I had 2 children, and though I had very generous family leave, it was not lost on me that, in fact, was made clear to me that it was happening at the mercy of the rector, who I worked with at that time, who's now a bishop in the church, whose diocese, by the way, does not offer family leave. Anyway, that you really are kind of what your story is, Julia, too, is that you really are at the mercy of who you work for, and both vestry and rector, if you're having children. So part of the story about this at the last General Convention was at the heat of Me Too movement, and there was a special committee on women, and that was appointed by Gay Jennings, our president, really looking at the different aspects of Me Too and the different aspects of both lay and clergy, both people of color and white women, what their experience was in the church, and kind of looking at it from all different angles, theological, practical, human resources, just liturgical, just kind of everything. And there were many, many initiatives and many resolutions that came out of that committee. It was a very activist committee. One of the things that came out of it was a resolution to assemble a task force to develop, the official title of it is the Task Force to Develop Church-Wide Family Leave Policies. And the charge of that task force was to come back to the next General Convention, the 80th General Convention, with a comprehensive plan for mandatory church-wide family leave policy. And so, Julia, do you want like an overview of that, or do you want to wait and we hear from Rebecca? And what's your pleasure?
Out of habit, I muted myself. Why don't you go ahead and give us that overview, because I think it helps to frame Rebecca and John as well. That would be terrific. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we started meeting right when the triennium began, after the appointments were made to the various interim bodies. And our team was really diverse, lots of different people, different walks of life, and different places in their professions and family organization and their family perspectives. So it was a very cool group to start out with, and we were all coming at this conversation from different vantage points, which was a strength. So the first thing that we did was we spent the first of 3 years in complete research mode. We weren't planning, scheduling, there was no project, there was no project design. It was really about doing our due diligence to research. It is a very technical, as we'll hear from both John and Rebecca, it is a very technical issue. And on one level, as so many things work at General Convention, we have the emotional imperative around family leave. It's a justice issue. Leave policies disproportionately affect women of color. Every way you come at it, it is a justice-based issue about providing family leave, as you mentioned, Julia, in your introduction. And we are behind as an industrialized country in that regard, way behind. So we were all kind of coming at it from the justice-based issue, emotional component of it. We all had our stories, we all shared our stories, and some were pretty grisly. And then we decided that we would spend a lot of time getting the whole team up to the same starting line about our understanding about the complexities and nuances of the issue of family leave. So we spent a year, and we consulted early with Church Pension. They gave us some resources of people to hear from. We heard speakers, we read papers, we attended conferences, we really spread ourselves out. We did several surveys. We were really wanting to talk to young clergy and lay professionals in the church. We had polls, surveys, conversations. We went to dioceses, and then we also did a comprehensive research project to map out kind of the history of family leave resolutions in the Episcopal Church, because we were the 7th interim body commissioned by General Convention in the past 30 years, asking to come back to General Convention with a mandatory family leave policy. So our initial question when we were researching was, why? Why is it that we're the 7th committee to put something like this together? Why is it that 6 other attempts didn't make it out of legislative committee at General Convention? Why is that? And so we spent a year answering that question, listening to people, gathering data. We have this great little data bank with all kinds of our findings. We interviewed fellows in a variety of different interest groups and think tanks. And really what we found was that that we really got a deeper appreciation, earned a deeper appreciation for the complexity of this issue. We spent some time with Church Pension people that helped us really understand and complicate our understanding of this issue. And really there were some insurmountable barriers. When we came to the end of our research after a year, we realized that there was just some insurmountable barriers, and those are detailed in our report, in our Blue Book report that we've submitted to the General Convention office. But to summarize it, there's no federal law. The family leave that passed in the 103rd Congress really is unpaid. It's 6 weeks. Just a small number of people that it actually applies to. There's no insurance products because there's no federal policy. There's no insurance products out there. So Church Pension was like, we'd love to provide this to the church, but there is nothing for us to buy, for insurance. So it doesn't exist. If Church Pension was to offer it, they would have to offer 52 different policies because there are 8 states that do have family leave policies. But everything would have to be tailored to the kind of the action right now without a federal law is at the state level. So you'd have to, not only that, but then the complication of the Episcopal Church is more than the United States. So you've got all of these different countries that are within kind of the borders of the Episcopal Church, and that's a whole other level of complexity. And we spent quite a bit of time interviewing, in particular, Province 9 personnel, diocesan staff, and bishops because ironically, in many circumstances, their countries are much more liberal and expansive about family leave than the United States. So not only was there no federal law, there's no insurance product, it would be extremely and prohibitively costly for an employer to just to offer this on its own. And also it's just administratively complex. There's a lot, you have to have some very significant human resources complexity in place. So people are charting and, so I don't want to get too far down in the weeds. I could talk for the next 2 hours about all of those barriers. So what we decided was that, first of all, we had to feel bad for a while. We gave ourselves a chance and a time period to feel bad, that we realized that we weren't going to be able to come back. We weren't going to be able to fill the mandate of the resolution. We were not going to be able to come back to General Convention with a mandatory paid family leave policy for the Episcopal Church. And so, hearkening back to that initial theme, the question became, what is the incremental change that we can make? How can we bring ourselves closer? How can we devise something that is both didactic and also doable, that could see some action and get, maybe get something out beyond committee and onto the floors for consideration in both the House of Deputies and House of Bishops. So we teamed up with Church Pension. They helped us hire a really fantastic consultant and also paid for part of it, which was very appreciated. And we worked with him for the balance of our time in the triennium. What we came up with was, okay, we may not be able to offer this, but we can, and there may not be any insurance companies that offer this product right now, but we can get ready for that inevitability down the road. And Rebecca can talk more about that, about the options or the possibilities for a federal mandate. So we basically developed a matrix of 3 different levels with 12 or 13 different aspects of family leave. The idea being that that resource could be used by Church Pension in negotiating with insurance carriers for product to offer the church around a family leave benefit. And also dioceses that have the resources or congregations, it would be a workable plan that people on the diocesan and parish level could use to deploy a substantive, thoughtful, researched plan around family leave. So it's kind of like a little buffet. There's a gold standard and a silver standard and a bronze standard, and then there's 13 different aspects about like how much time, who's eligible, those kind of things. And I'm actually working with 2 dioceses who are already using it to work with their diocesan staff and their diocesan convention to to mandate some family leave for the clergy and lay professionals in their diocese. And I'll stop there. Lots more to say, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that overview. And I think on behalf of everyone who's taking the time to learn today, thank you for all of that work. So John, we've been hearing about CPG's role in this work as a resource and in consultation with the task force, and just also learning about the breadth of your experience in the corporate sphere. I'd love to hear more about the technical issues, the technical issues that those of us who start first in the realm of the ideological, the philosophical and the emotional. When you said to me last week, there are no products for this, it completely stopped me in my tracks, because of course there aren't. And that's part of what you need to be able to help administrate this and support this for the church. But can you tell us more about those obstacles, those technical issues?
Julia, yes, I will. And thank you for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. So a little bit about my background. I've been working, before joining CPG, I was working with large employers, and this exact conversation happened with a lot of my clients. And it really does, equity and justice, they all agreed that we should have, that people are moving towards paid family leave, but then it really comes down into the details. And Devin, I read your report. You did a great job. There's a lot of challenges there, and you outline the details. I do like the menu created, does create options for the individuals, but it comes down to, it's administratively is very complex. And what I mean by that is, it's not just administering the policy, a paid family leave policy, how it's structured, it's got to coordinate with other type of leave programs, from your disability programs, vacation policies, and so forth, and also state laws. So that coordination creates administrative challenges. And then there's a cost component too, right? So what is the cost to actually adopt the paid family leave? And each organization has different sort of financial positions, whether they can afford or what they can't afford. And then it comes to really, for smaller organizations, how do you support family leave with hiring new staff to support their roles? But it really comes down to the decisions you look through. If you look through the report, the 13 sort of areas of decisions are really sort of difficult decisions. Each organization's got to decide what's right for them, and the financial basis, also what they think they can support through their staff. And when I was working with other organizations, we would take, it was actually harder to implement a paid family leave and think of all the administrative and sort of justice issues in the design than actually doing a medical plan. Everyone thinks medical is so complicated. A paid family leave to set up the infrastructure, set the design, and communicate it out and educate people is actually far more challenging than a medical design. So I can go into a lot more details, but the report which Devin's team created, task force, did outlines a lot of the challenges they encountered.
Are there corporate models that we can study? I mean, are there companies that have nailed this?
Yeah, they've done it, and I don't say they've nailed it. They continue to enhance and try to improve it. But the key thing they have is a centralized payroll, which administers those programs, right? So here we are. When the resolution came out, and I heard the task force, I was thinking of all the different variables the church will have to solve, right? We have 100 different dioceses. You have down to the parish level. You have 50 states you have to resolve, especially the 8 or 9 that already have laws that pass. You've got to hit, the more expand the variables, the more challenging it is to do. And then when you don't have a centralized payroll, how would you create a consistent process across the church? And it almost becomes insurmountable, as I think the task force realized within the first year. So how corporations do it, they basically it's all self-administered through their payroll solution. And the information comes through payroll, so they don't want to turn it on and off their payroll. It's very technical, but they have the system to monitor and sort of administer the program. And so by having a single payroll solution, they can administer across all 50 states easier. I'd say it's easier than the church could ever do. Is that helpful?
Yes, although I hate hearing the word insurmountable, but maybe Rebecca is going to solve this all for us at the legislative end of things. So I'd love to hear about your work in the Office of Government Relations, Rebecca, in relation to what's in front of the legislators right now, what this administration is working on, and what the Episcopal Church is working on around paid family leave.
Great, yes. Thank you, Julia, and thank you so much to my fellow panelists for your expertise and wisdom. Thank you to SEEP for hosting this event. So just a word about the Office of Government Relations. We're the Episcopal Church's advocacy office based in Washington, D.C. We represent the public policy positions of the church to the government in Washington. Everything that we do is based on resolutions from General Convention or Executive Council. So we work on a whole range of issues. And since February 2020, when Executive Council directed us to advocate to the Congress for the establishment of a paid family leave program, that has been one of the issues that we're working on. So I will note also that one way that we do our advocacy is through the Episcopal Public Policy Network. We sent an alert this morning on paid family leave. So come to the OGR website, take action via the action alert, and let your members of Congress know that you support paid family leave. So just to say a bit about the landscape, there's been increasing interest in having a federal paid family leave program. The governing law right now is the Family Medical Leave Act, which Devin helped to shepherd through. And although we want changes to it, it's still the only thing that has passed that's helped. So we're grateful for that. But 56% of workers in the US are covered by FMLA, which is actually a decline from 2012. So fewer people are eligible than there used to be. Only 2 in 10 workers have access to paid leave at their jobs. So as a reminder, FMLA is unpaid leave with a guarantee of employment upon one's return, but does not pay, families who are not able to take 12 weeks off work are not able to use it. And Black and Hispanic workers are less likely than white non-Hispanic workers to have access to paid family and medical leave. So as we've said, this is an issue of justice, certainly economic justice, and also of the need for family. There's well-documented benefits, in particular for new parents to be able to have time to bond with a child, for ability to breastfeed for a longer period of time, again, to be able to have one's job when one's returned. So there's lots to say. So in 2017, the Brookings Institute, typically known as a more left-leaning think tank, and the American Enterprise Institute, often known as being more on the conservative side, came together to put together a proposal on unpaid family leave and disagreed and still said this needs to happen. And we may disagree about the contours, but as my fellow panelists and Julia, you have noted, we are the only industrialized country that does not have a paid family leave policy. What people disagree about are some of the things we've mentioned as well. So a key question is eligibility. Who is eligible? Is it new parents, new birth parents, adoptive parents, foster parents? Is it then caring for one's immediate family member or extended family? Who are the people who are able to be cared for this? What is the benefit? Is it 6 weeks paid, 12 weeks paid, fully paid? Is it tiered based on salary? Do the highest earning workers get paid their full salary? Is it different for lower income workers or hourly workers? So I think the benefit definition is another challenge, which Devin and the task force's report lays out so well. There's questions that come up in the Washington context, of course, as well, around what will the impact be for employers? Will employers suffer? Will they not be able to afford to keep their staff on? What is the impact on workers whose colleagues leave unpaid leave? A report just came out of Stanford looking at the impact of paid leave in New York State, which is one of the states that has paid family leave, and it found that there was no negative impact for employers. So I think it's worth noting that there's research because of this state rollout where we can see what the impacts are of these policies. And so far they're beneficial. Workers are more invested, more likely to return to the workforce, especially women who are more likely to drop out after the birth of a child. And I think there's still questions about, discrimination against women and people of childbearing age, which is often one of the harder things to try to parse out. But I think, as many of us probably know, something that happens in the field. And then, of course, the hardest one for Washington is always how to pay for it. There's different proposals that have been on the table. Among them, a payroll tax, which would have the argument for that is that everyone would be invested in this. This is something that benefits all of us, whether or not one has children, it benefits our society, and that's the right way to implement it. There's others who are saying, and this is what's in the Biden administration's plan, that it should be a tax on the wealthiest Americans making more than $400,000, and that would be a better way to pay for it. There's been proposals in the previous Congress about having a benefit for new parents only be an early child tax credit benefit. So not a real benefit in terms of paid family leave as we're talking about it, but an income that would allow someone to maybe take time off work. But then they'd have to pay back that child tax credit benefit later on. So a lot of different proposals and contention about what it is. And just to say right now, the Biden administration did put forward a paid family leave plan in their American Families Plan. That's not part of the bipartisan infrastructure deal that may be able to pass. The news evolves quickly on this issue, but there's other proposals as well, most notably by House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Richard Neal, who's been an advocate for this for some time, part of his Building an Economy for Families Act, and then also another proposal, the Family Act, again, which has also had bipartisan support historically. So a lot of different options on the table, but the question is, can they pass and actually give us a federal level family leave plan, which Americans very broadly support and want and recognize that we need.
Thank you for that overview. And a question I had about the church's role as advocates is that, is it challenging to advocate for something that we are not yet actually providing for our own workers in any standardized way? Is that a challenge for you?
I think on this, actually, we're making the case that John and Devin have said, which is that we're not able to provide this benefit because there's not federal guidance in place. We need there to be a federal law so that we're able to implement this plan. And so I think in that case, we can go in and just say, we need this for our own churches, but also we're advocating, our office does focus on the kind of not just our own church folks, but on the broader societal questions. And as I said, this is a question of racial justice, of economic impact, of impact on our families and communities. There's now, we're part of a really wonderful coalition, Families Valued, and have signed on to a number of letters advocating for paid family leave over the past few months. And we're seeing that coalition broaden. So the folks who are suffering through long COVID right now are pushing for paid family leave because they need caregiving or time off work themselves. Disabilities advocates, people who are advocating for those who are pregnant, are also advocating for protection. So it's a wide range of folks, and you can make a lot of different arguments as to why we need this. And I think as people of faith, and again, as the report does so well, we can make a theological argument and say this is connected to the importance of family and family values and care for those to whom we're able to provide care for. And then as well, of course, there's the economic and other broader societal arguments that we've seen in other countries. There's a benefit, economically, again, participation in the workforce and commitment to employers rather than needing to step back from that.
Yeah, can I just add a little to that, Julia?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it really comes down, if we had a federal program, it's a game changer in how this could actually roll out. Then if you had a consistent process across the country, then everyone's playing this from the same playing field. There's some employers may have more generous, but at least you have a starting point for the whole country. And one thing when I looked at, that California's been having a paid family leave for quite a while, and theirs is mostly employee paid. They basically do a payroll deduction. I think it's about 1% of someone's compensation goes to pay for the benefit. And it's been a fairly successful state program. So it can be paid for. The question now is, and those employees in California know the rules of the plan, how to work, and they use the benefit to their needs. And it's affordable in the sense if it's through the country, but if you do it by individual dioceses, it becomes where you're not spreading out the risk across the whole population. You're doing it to a very localized area, and it's harder to do for smaller congregations, smaller employers.
This is not the first moment in CPG's history where our values as a church bump up against federal laws and then the limitations of what we can provide. I'm just mindful of the ways that once same-sex marriage became law of the land, different opportunities opened up around insurance. But CPG has been able to push forward in other moments also in these justice issues. So I'm really grateful for the exchange among all three of you and the folks you represent to make this happen. Devin, you unmuted. I'm wondering if you wanted to bring us back around to the task force and the what's before General Convention? Or
Well, no, I mean, I just wanted to point out in respect to Rebecca's comments is that one of the things that we've realized is that that the Office of Governmental Relations did not have an enabling resolution that equipped them to be in the ring working on advocating for family leave policies. So, I think, they work within the confines of what General Convention and Executive Council tell them they can work on. And so it's better, so as part of our work, we actually passed a resolution through Executive Council that equipped Rebecca's office to work on this in Washington and with the different allies and advocates for it. So I think it's a good reminder. I mean, it was kind of shocking to me that they didn't have an enabling resolution around this issue that's so important to us. And so I think, it's important for us to remember as a church that we have a tremendous resource in Washington. And when there's issues that are passionately important to the life of our church, especially justice-based issues, we have to remember to make sure that this resource that we have in Washington has an enabling resolution that they can use to get throw their hat in the ring and be at the table. So it was just another like, oh my God, it was like we were halfway through the training when we realized we'd gone to Rebecca a couple of times, and then finally she was like, well, we don't actually have an enabling resolution on this. So it was a really good learning for me and for the team about like, wow, we need to be able to make sure that we are equipping our best resource in Washington to be working on these issues that we care so deeply about.
This conversation is a great primer for those of us who are not as deeply ensconced in the governance of the church to be reminded about how we all work together to move the important conversations of our time forward. And you all are modeling that so well, and reminding us that we all need to be involved in the councils of the church at every level. So vestry, diocesan, national church, and with our government. And I'm wondering, Devin, what would you want rectors, wardens, bishops, other leaders in the church to know and be thinking about in reference to this issue right now before us?
It's a very provocative question. It was it was ironic that I was chairing this task force, and my music director in my parish had to go on family leave. We had no policy. There was, I was just taking a dose of my own medicine here as the rector, and a vestry that wasn't feeling generous. So it was, it was a really interesting process. I think that, I think that the most important thing to remember is that we are not Congregationalist church. We are an Episcopal church, and that we are stronger together than we are apart. I also think that the Episcopal Church has yet to figure out how to leverage its resources in meaningful ways. I mean, we have, I don't know, I think it was something like $82 million of liquidatable assets. And they put, like we were talking about PPP loans in Executive Council and stuff. I mean, there's parishes that are struggling, and mine, are struggle to pay the light bill or whatever. But as a church, we have a lot of resources. And I think that there's a conversation to be had about how we can use those resources for significant impact at the highest levels of government and decision making. As far as leadership, I think that the primary thing is combine the power to combine, that we can leverage tremendous change as combined friends and colleagues in the church. And so I've been working with 2 different dioceses who are really interested in really advocating for a mandatory family leave policy in their diocese. And it started with a couple friends having a conversation, kind of like you, Julia, with having the conversation that kind of led to the webinar, that there was combining around common interests, and then keep finding other people that share those interests. And and then leveraging some change and starting small and getting educated, and then going to places where decisions are being made, and diocesan convention, diocesan council, standing committees, general convention. There's just a lot of different levels of the church, of its polity, where people can have an impact. So I think part of it is kind of what you were saying, Julie, about like that, some awareness about where those points are, where those places are where decisions are being made, and where futures of entities like churches and dioceses and the Episcopal Church can be changed and can be influenced. And there's a lot of opportunity. So
that's really helpful. I see a question. Oh, I'm sorry, John, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was add a little to Devin, because I think Devin had a key point, is education, right? And she did spend a year of investing in their time, the task force, their time educating on the plans. And if I had to talk to somebody within the church, like, read the report, because that helps you get educated relatively quickly and what you need, the challenges are. And that grid of sort of design options, the bronze, silver, and gold, really starts that framework of those discussions, because it's hard to have a robust conversation unless you know what the sort of decision points are. And that task force report helps with that, understand those decision points.
Devin, do you think while I take a couple of questions, could you dig up the report and put it in the chat to link so that folks might, it's very easy to find, but this is, and it really is an extraordinary piece of work. And that education piece, just having these conversations is really critical. When I started the conversation with the executive committee of my parish about giving my colleague paid family leave, it sparked people's memories of 35 years ago when I adopted my child. My law firm didn't let me have more than a week off, and that was a woman professional. And she said, I didn't give birth, so it wasn't a medical leave. And we haven't actually come that far. So these are vital conversations to have. I see a question here in the chat. I'm going to shout out to Lindsay Haig, who is actually one of my parishioners and a major policy wonk. So I'm so glad you're here, Lindsay. And she says, thank you, panelists, for doing this panel. You mentioned the continuing infrastructure conversations occurring on the Hill. How likely is it that the human infrastructure component of POTUS's original proposal be part of any deal that may be struck? So I'm going to direct this towards Rebecca.
Thank you. Great question. And again, by the day, the news is changing on this. But what's happening now, as far as I understand it, is Biden introduced the American Jobs Plan, which was more of the quote unquote hard infrastructure, but also included a lot of other elements. And then the second piece of that was the American Families Plan. The paid family leave is part of the American Families Plan. The bipartisan group of senators came together to hammer out a framework for a bipartisan infrastructure deal that could pass. And that means the 60 votes in the Senate that are needed to have a filibuster-proof majority. The paid family leave is not part of that deal, which is not surprising because it was a compromise bill which took out a lot of the, again, so-called non-hard infrastructure plans. Biden then said, I won't sign this unless we sign the other. So I won't sign the bipartisan bill unless we also sign this other kind of more American Families Plan through reconciliation, which is the process of being able to pass a bill with just a Senate simple majority in the Senate. So big picture, I think we don't know. I think that, what it will be important to see what the budget bill that the Senate passes, what's in that, that gives them the permission to pass the reconciliation bill and sort of sets the balance for that. But I guess I would just say that there's often a mismatch between what American public thinks and what Congress does. But we can help address that. And so one of our jobs, I think, as citizens is to go and say to Congress, I support this. And so I want you to. The action alert that I shared in the chat is not for a particular bill. We could have done that. We often do that in our action alerts. In fact, most of the time we're saying co-sponsor this legislation, vote yes on this legislation. But in this case, we actually wanted to say, tell your members of Congress that this is important to you. So to be a little bit agnostic as to what the particular dimensions are, again, of all these different categories, but just to say this matters and this needs to be in a deal. And then when it gets hashed out, there may be compromises that may fall short of what we want. But there's something about signifying support and signifying priority. And again, the polling shows this. But somehow it hasn't translated into action yet. So let's all get together and let Congress know that this needs to be in legislation that they pass. Again, for a whole host of reasons of benefit to all of us, whether or not we would take advantage of this leave. I really think that if we make the case that it will be possible, because we have seen bipartisan interest, even if the details of the proposals have differed.
John, it looks like you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I do, and it's also what what Rebecca and you said just prior to the conversation, Rebecca's comments is, it's a justice issue, right? We talked about that, and we're looking for a federal solution. But as an employer perspective, it's becoming more of a recruiting tool as well. So they're thinking, okay, and this is more corporate American, and it's going to happen through all employers, right? The trend rate for paid family leave is growing within the corporate ranks because they know it's a justice issue, but it's also now a recruiting tool that we have a good paid family leave policy for people who need that as part of any type of change in position. So it's, as you think through it, it's justice, but also if you're not having paid family leave, are you disadvantaged if you're trying to recruit talent? And that's just something employers should think about as well.
Although it does strike me that supports that larger companies can manage this, but those smaller, the smaller companies that Devin first referenced, can get exempted out pretty easily because it's more challenging, and we could replicate the same thing in the church. I fear is that more resource churches may have the latitude to recruit based on the ability to give this, and smaller churches are going to get left behind unless we can figure out how to serve everybody in the ways that you all are working on. Have I got that right?
Yeah, yeah, it's right. It's just another variable just to think about. It's also a recruiting tool for some employers.
Absolutely.
But it takes you to a different level of the justice issue, right? So like in my diocese, there's congregations that are serving underserved congregations, or underserved communities, right? And so, looking at the talent, the clergy talent, the lay professional talent, and kind of what John was saying about the recruiting. I mean, that we're seeing that these really engaging mission fields, these really engaging communities of faith that are doing cool things on the ground, that don't have the financial resources, is just yet another pathway to send the talent to the big resourced congregations. And a lot of the actions happening in these smaller congregations that are really integrated into the life of their community. And so it's kind of like another nuance of the justice conversation about who's being served in our church and who is perpetually systemically underserved. So there's some very interesting nuances to the conversation. That comment that John made takes us a lot deeper.
Do you see a follow-up question from Lindsay to Rebecca, about the role of the Senate parliamentarian to determine germaneness, not gameness, regarding fitting paid leave or any other proposal into reconciliation?
Thanks. Yeah, so it is up to the Senate parliamentarian. And so what I have seen is that it may be that, so reconciliation allows for provisions that are budget related to pass, but things that are not budget related not to pass. So as we may remember, the most recent example of the Senate parliamentarian ruling was on the minimum wage provision, and whether or not that would be eligible to be in the bill, and it was ruled that it was not. So my understanding is that the job protection piece of it would more likely than not be able to be included in a bill that was included reconciliation, because it's not it would be a mandate on employers, not with budget implications, but funding the leave so that it was not unpaid leave, but was paid leave would be allowable. So that's, an initial guess, but it does in the end often come down to these highly technical questions of Senate processes that we have to kind of determine where they go. But, I think we'll see what happens this summer. I mean, this is the time. This is when we will see legislation pass or not. The majority of legislation is passed in the first year of a new administration in that Congress, no matter, even if it's a two-term president. Like, this is the year for things to happen. So everybody, it's time to hustle this summer and try to get this through. But again, there's other ways too, and there's other proposals. And if it is an incremental change piece rather than like a very comprehensive family paid leave like the Biden administration proposed, it may be that there first comes child protections, and then hopefully again after that would come protections for, family leave, and again expanded sick leave, which we saw temporarily added during the pandemic, but those protections expire. We have a lot of things that are in flux right now. The child tax credit is about to roll out, the refundable child tax credit for families, and that also ties into some of these conversations about the burden of caring for young children. And children all the way up through 18. So I think that we can also keep pushing on all these different aspects, even if our full hopes aren't realized in this.
Thank you. And it strikes me, I'm thinking, Devin, about your 5 triennia of service and the work that General Convention has done around labor and equity and justice issues in the church. I'm thinking about policy changes in reference to lay and ordained staff, and certainly about benefits and same-sex marriage, and now this just feels like each triennium we're working in a more explicit and careful, increasingly explicit and careful way about carrying our ideals all the way through how we do our church life. And I guess I'm looking at the time, my open-ended question to all 3 of you is this the next frontier for the church, to living into our values in the church so that we can speak them out to the world? And what are the next equity issues? What are the next justice issues around labor, especially, that we should be thinking about as a church? That started to Devin and ended up to all 3 of you.
Well, I'll just say I just yesterday ended a 4-day, 20 Zoom hour executive council meeting. And one of the things that we heard about was the results of the racial justice audit that the Episcopal Church spent a little over $1 million to look at over the past 3 years, and did a very deep dive into leadership and doing this. That's posted. It's a public document. It is fascinating and really, really provocative and helpful. But I think that the word of the day is about systems. What are our systems? What are our HR systems? What are the way that we're governing ourselves, the way that we're living together, the decisions that we make about our structures and our buildings and all of these systems, and how are they bringing us to justice? How are they preventing justice? Where are they standing in the way? What changes can be made around our existing systems? Some people want to just blow them all up and start over, and that's one option. But I think that more and more that we're going to be having a lot of systems talk. The presiding bishop and the presiding officers are launching a truth and reconciliation process. We have a similar process going on for women in the church around being the objects of sexual misconduct and sexual violence in the workplace. And so we're looking at ourselves, exactly how you characterized it, Julia, with like what are our central beliefs? What are our core beliefs of who we are and our values, and how do we base our lives in the gospel and following Jesus, and what about ourselves, particularly our systems, are preventing us from doing that?
And Rebecca, I'm so glad that you've brought everyone to mind of the ways that we can engage with the Policy Network and stay attuned to your work and how we can be voices to our government. Are there other equity issues, particularly I'm thinking about labor, justice, gender equity, in which you're involved, that you want to make sure that we're aware in our audience at home?
Sure. I mean, yeah, there's so many different issues. And what's amazing about our church is that we've spoken on hundreds and hundreds of them. And so our office is charged with taking all of that on. So there's policies that we turn to from the 1980s that are informing our ask for a meeting on Congress, that we're having this week. I mean, that's very common. So we are really kind of living in the weeds of General Convention, Executive Council policy resolutions. So I would say, that there's so many different issues. And I would say, first that people can find the issue that they're most passionate about to learn more about it, connecting through our office, and then also with organizations that have really good grassroots presence in a way that, we're a small team in Washington, we have a network, but we're really focused on the federal level. So to look at the state and local level where there's so much impact for change on issues we care about, like criminal justice reform, and a lot of labor laws and zoning questions and housing and all kinds of things that really matter a lot. But then, I guess I'd also say that, as I mentioned before, right now, what's happening is that Congress is making very monumental decisions right now about what they do before we turn to midterm season. And so it's important now, and it's important whatever your member of Congress's political orientation is. We sometimes get questioned, well, my senator agrees with me, what shall I do? Still voice your support, and voice your support after votes, and voice your support for those issues, because it matters that members hear not just complaints, but affirmations, and hear a sense of what constituents care about. So I just think it's a really good time because there's so much on the table that has a chance to move. And things that may not pass, I'll also say, we're still doing work just by moving it. So to name one specific issue, HR 40, which is about a commission to establish study of reparations, which the church has supported for years, had a hearing in the last Congress where Episcopal Bishop Eugene Sutton testified, and Katrina Brown also told her story in Episcopalian, and that has passed the House. So that's very significant, even if it doesn't really have a chance of passing in the Senate. So sometimes these things take decades, to be able to move. The reparations bill has been introduced since 1989, when Congressman Conyers put it forward. So sometimes we've got to take the long view and keep working on it. Again, whatever the substance of the issue, but working for justice over decades, because it takes sometimes that long to make the kind of change we want to.
Interestingly, you've brought us almost entirely back to Devin's first comments about everything is incremental when it comes to policy and change. And churches have never been known to be fast-moving institutions, but we're moving, and we're moving because of the good work of folks like you and your collaborators. I know some people will need to be signing off here really soon, but I just wanted to double check that we don't have other questions from our attendees who have been with us this afternoon. And I'm not seeing any in the chat. So just so we kind of end back on our main topic of hand, so these questions of paid family leave, as we prepare and we pray and we think about next year's important work at General Convention, any last reflections you want to leave us with, Devin, Rebecca, or John?
I want to make one correction. HR 40 is passed out of committee, and we're expecting it to pass the House, but it has not yet. So we've got 190 co-sponsors on that. So I spoke too quickly on that. So just that correction. But yeah, I would say that just really, again, commend the work that's gone into the really detailed analytic side of what needs to happen, and then say that I'm hopeful we will be able to push for the federal level, and then our church will be able to put in place these models and offer to our own people, and then continue to advocate so that the benefits in our church are not just for the clergy and lay professionals, but really, again, are for everyone in society, so that they have access to and the ability to care for children and family and themselves in as broad a way as possible, and that we as a society can support that.
And I'll say one last couple of words is hope for the federal solution, and hopefully it happens sooner than later. It's something where in the benefits world, there are benefits geeks out there. We said this should have been passed. They're always hoping for a federal solution, because going across 50 state solution is not really a good solution. So keep hoping for that. But I think, Devin, you said it when we were in a planning meeting for this hopefully they don't have to have another resolution to define paid family leave. I think that the task force has really come up with a solution based on the current environment, how a diocese can really implement the plan going forward for their needs, for their population.
That's right. Our goal was to not ever need another committee, interim body committee on family leave. But I will say that just a reminder to everybody that the assignments for legislative committee, you know, we have this like bonus year, right? Because general convention was supposed to be this summer and now it's next summer. So we've got this, and all the, you know, the Blue Book reports are they're on the general convention website, accessible to everybody, and on just a whole myriad of issues, a lot of them system related and policy and labor related. And the committees are going to be announced in the fall and then asked to start their work. So any hearing or any kind of conversation about that be happening, that will be public. And so it's really important for people to engage where their passion is and where they're interested, and where they have some expertise or where they want to learn more. This is like a very unique opportunity brought to you by COVID, but it is, you know, a unique opportunity for us to be engaging each other across the church in this kind of extra bonus year that we wouldn't already normally have. So a lot of those conversations will be much more accessible than they would if they were just happening specifically at General Convention.
It's a great reminder, and it does seem like we have an invitation to be newly engaged, differently engaged, and we have tools to do it across time and space, which is just a wonderful thing, albeit from a terrible source. Again, thank you so much, all three of you. Thank you to Anne and CPG. Thank you to Joe and the SEEP Network for the opportunity to just touch on these questions. I hope everyone will be sure to read the report and all those other great Blue Book reports that have just come out in the last month or so, and be involved in the issues about which you're passionate for our church and for our world. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, John. And thank you to all who've been with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks all so much. Pleasure to be with you.
Take care.